This is a 2009 Dodge Ram 1500 with the 5.7 Hemi engine. It was towed here because the owner of the vehicle thought that the fuel pump was bad. However, when I attempted to start it, I could tell that there was something wrong inside the engine because of the erratic noise that it made when the engine turned over. You could tell that it was lacking compression on one of the cylinders. If I held the gas down at about half throttle, I was able to get the engine to start, but it just sounded terrible, so I didn't want to run it any more than I had to. That's why I didn't record a segment of the engine running. But trust me, it was misfiring like crazy, and it had a ton of valve train noise. So I suspected either a broken valve spring, which are kind of common on these 5.7 Hemis, or possibly one of the rollers on the lifters was seized up and it ate up the cam. That's also a somewhat common occurrence on the Hemi engines. The scan tool data showed the majority of the misfires on cylinder number 4. Cylinder number 4 is on the passenger side, second back from the front of the engine, so fairly easy to get at. And the passenger side valve cover comes off easier than the driver's side one does. So what I'm doing right now is I'm unplugging all the coils. I'm going to unplug everything that's on that wiring harness to get it out of the way, including the fuel injectors. It just makes taking the valve cover off quite a bit easier, with less stuff in the way. You'll see I also disconnect the PCM, the 4 connectors at the PCM, that big connector I'm doing right there on the firewall, or on the fender wall. And then there's one ground just above that, that's a 10 millimeter. And when you unplug all that stuff, you can actually fold that whole harness up on the other side of the engine to get it out of your way. It really frees up a lot of space. That's that 10 millimeter bolt that secures that ground strap in place. This truck only has 99,000 miles on it. I was pretty shocked that it would have an internal engine failure with such low miles. I've got an '08 Hemi, 5.7 Hemi, and I have 282,000 miles on mine. I guess maybe I was just lucky. I don't know. So there's 2 bolts on each coil, 4 coils here. And we're going to pull these coils out of the way. Just to make it a little bit easier here. It's a good idea anytime you're going to open up an engine to take an air gun and air nozzle and blow all that crud out of there. You don't want that falling there. These are the retainers for the heater hoses. I'm just pulling all the 8 millimeter bolts out that secure the valve cover down the cylinder head. A couple of the back ones there are a little bit difficult to get at, but definitely doable. I just tapped on the edge of it with a hammer just to break it loose. There are valve covers out of the way. I'm just checking all the springs right now. Okay, I took you off the tripod so you can see what I found here. Check it out. It's got a broken valve spring. See that? Right below my thumb. You can see how loose the spring is in here. Move it all around. So I'm going to pull the driver's side valve cover off and check, but this is cylinder 4, and this was registering the majority of the misfires. The misfires are so hard that I almost feel like I was getting erroneous readings. But since I'm in here, I'm going to check them all. Well, I definitely didn't pull the driver's side valve cover off. I decided that a cylinder leak down test would do the same thing, and it was much easier to do. So I'm pulling the rocker rail off, and you can see I'm loosening them up a little bit at a time. You don't want to just start at one end and go all the way to the other end. With this valve spring tension that's against the rockers, you chance bending that. So it's good to loosen them up a little bit at a time. It turned out that spring was actually broken 3 pieces once I got it out of there. I'm going to pull one of the spark plugs out, and I'm going to use my cylinder leak down tester to apply air pressure to keep that valve up in place. I don't want that valve dropping down. There's different ways of doing it. If you don't have a cylinder leak down test, you could always you could lower that piston down. You could feed some rope down into the cylinder and then turn the crankshaft to push the rope up to the top, which would essentially squeeze the valve into the head and hold it in place. But since I had this Harbor Freight cylinder leak down test, I want to say I paid like $30 for this thing. It paid for itself just on this one job. Now they make a special tool for the Hemis, just like they do for the LS engines, the GM LS engines, a special tool that mounts on the pedestals for the rocker rail for compressing the valve spring. I don't have that tool, and it would have made this job go a lot easier if I'd have known somebody that had the tool. But I just used a regular old, $20 screw type valve spring compressor, and it did the job. It was a bit of a battle putting the new spring on. The old spring came off relatively easy because it was broken. But putting the new spring on was a bit of a pain with that tool, but it did get the job done. It just added to the frustration. I put that towel down in there so that if that keeper fell out, I'd be able to find it. I tapped on the top of the valve spring compressor a little bit just to jar that top of the spring loose so I could get the keepers out of there. Like I said, the proper tool would have made this part go a lot easier, but it did get it done. was frustrated with the valve spring compressor, so I'm actually using a pair of vice grips around a socket, and I push down on the spring while having the magnet through the center of the socket. And I've had success with this in the past. I was actually able to get one of the keepers out here doing it this way. There it is. There you can see the spring in 3 pieces. Now that little piece of metal around there, that's actually an oil bath shield. It's supposed to help retain oil on the spring and keep the spring cool so the spring doesn't fatigue and break, but clearly that doesn't work. There's our broken spring. The new spring does not come with that, and it tells you not to reuse it. I bought a spring from Dodge dealer, and it was, I want to say it was like, I don't know, $5-10 or something for the spring. It wasn't expensive at all. And it comes with the shim that you put underneath it. You don't reuse that little shield because that would actually raise the height of the spring. There's no good way to film putting this back together without my big dumb head in the way. I apologize for that. This was the hardest part about the whole job, was trying to get the keepers back in using that cheap valve spring compressor, but it worked. I'm just tapping on the valve to make sure that it's seated, make sure everything's good to go before I release the air pressure. Now it's time to reassemble, and this was one of the difficult parts about the job, was getting those rocker rails in place with the rockers in the right orientation with the push rods. I'm not sure if I'm not doing it right or if there's an easier way or what, but every time I've had one of these things apart, it seems like something as simple as this definitely increases the frustration level. Now, when you tighten this rail back down, you want to tighten it gradually. You don't want to, just like when you take it off, you don't want to start at one end and run it down and go all the way to the other end, because you will bend that rail. I'm just cleaning off the surface for the valve cover to go back on. Off camera, I put a new valve cover gasket on the valve cover, and we're going to sneak that back in here now. And the assembly is pretty straightforward. So here I'm putting the coils back in. It doesn't matter if they don't, if they don't go back in the same place where they came out. It makes no difference whatsoever. The only time that would matter is if you thought you were chasing down a misfire that was ignition related. Ours was definitely mechanical in this case. I'm putting the heater hoses back in their keepers that are attached to the valve cover bolts. I'm going to pull that wiring harness back through there, plug in all the fuel injectors, plug in all the coils, plug in the PCM. There's that big connector on the fender well, and then most importantly, don't forget the ground. Okay, I'm about to forget something here right now. Anybody who paid attention, what did I forget to do? I'm getting ahead of myself and I don't even realize it. I forgot to put the engine cover back on. The engine cover has to go on before you put the air cleaner on. I didn't figure that out until after the test drive, but that's okay. So I'm hooking the battery back up and we're going to start it up and see what happens. Thanks for watching, everybody. I appreciate the support.